I call this the likability tax, and it's definitely true. So you can say something and you're seen as confident and assertive. I can say the same thing and I can be called aggressive or emotional. And I have actually been called emotional before on a stage when I was doing a diversity presentation and somebody mentioned something that I disagreed with, and he really raised his voice and I mirrored the raise in voice, and he was like, "Oh, you're so emotional," and and I've suddenly felt about 8 years old again, and I thought, there is no way if I was a man stood here, you would have said I'm emotional. Absolutely no way.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. We have a very special guest with us today, Miss Marisa Kamall. Marisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So Marisa, me and you got connected obviously through Luca. Shout out to our last guest. And he told me all about you, and I took a look at your work, and I know your background is, running HSBC globally in so many different departments. You were there for you were there for like 10 years. Then, once you had a child, everything kind of changed from there, and then you launched GAIA, which is a women empowerment leadership coaching platform. So what I wanted to do today, and this topic is a fun one for me because I have a lot of opinions. So I always like having a debate because I think sometimes people don't look at it from other sides. But I'm just gonna pause here before we dive into all of that and the work you do and everything. Why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm, I guess you could say maybe like a recovering banker. So I worked in finance for a long time, for about 15, 16 years. 10 of those were at HSBC across the UK, Brazil, and most recently here. So I was the regional COO for the UAE and the Middle East. And I guess the real story is not all that stuff, which people might already know. But I decided to walk away from it after a series of personal circumstances and things that happened to me that made me realise actually that the corporate world and the world more generally just isn't set up necessarily for women to thrive. So I decided to, rather than kind of lick my wounds for too long, I decided to do something about that, which is now supporting women in leadership. Firstly, get to those positions, but then stay there, because I believe that the more women we have at the top of organisations, and therefore the more women on the world stage, the less wars, conflict, economic issues, all of that kind of stuff would definitely reduce. So it's all about balance for me. Balance.
Okay. So you said that you decided to, leave after being in that world for like so long. But what was interesting, so when I listened to your episode with Luca, for context, so you said that you had a child and then you got sick, and then they wanted to restructure you, and it's all happened in less than a year. But what was interesting to me, what you said was, if all three didn't happen, I wouldn't have been able to leave. So I'm curious, why did it need to be, and this doesn't just apply to you, I think this applies to all of us, why does it have to be like crushing pain before we decide to make a change and move on? So I'm curious, what was that for you?
Yeah, for me, I think I hadn't had my eyes open before about the realities of having corporate's really great, and actually it offers amazing opportunities. So I'm not speaking badly to that, but you can sell your soul a little bit. And in those big jobs.
Yeah, especially at that level for sure.
Yeah, exactly. You're doing 12 hours a day, and you've got to kind of reflect on why are you doing it? And for me, like you said, I had my daughter Paloma, I had postnatal depression, then I had pneumonia, I was hospitalised for a couple of weeks and it was life-threatening, and then shortly afterwards my employer had a conversation about making some changes to my role. And for me, it was just the triple that I was like, okay, that was bad. Okay, this is bad. Now this is really bad, And then, and I'm glad it happened like that now, because it needed to be that way for me to kind of see the alignment. And I remember sitting with my husband, he was like, you can't go back to that company, you can't work for, even though it happens everywhere, you can't actually. And I was like, you know what? I can't stand up in front of thousands of people that I used to lead and pretend that this place is aligned with my values. And lots of people can, but for me it was just a huge awakening. And I think if it had just been one of those things, it wouldn't have happened, because let's face it, the money's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So to walk away from that was pretty...
It's hard.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah. You said that you couldn't you wouldn't be able to go stand up in front of people and speak that in a way that is not aligned with who you were. But it sounds like, was it because when you left, it sounds like you rediscovered that what your core values are or whatever. My question is, were those values always there throughout your career, just hidden or not looked at, or did it change over the course of your career? Because maybe once upon a time you were aligned, and then now you're like, at this phase in my life, not so much anymore.
Yeah, so I think the values have always been there, but not so obvious until they were so like viscerally crossed.
Gotcha.
Viscerally is a word, isn't it? It feels like it. So viscerally crossed for me personally. And the thing I always say as well now is within GAIA and the corporate stuff that we do, I always look to people to really establish what their values are and what their like leadership DNA and their purposes and all that kind of stuff. And I never would have spent the time really doing that when I was in big corporate. And I feel like if I was to go back in now, which I won't, but I would be a completely different leader, So for me, it was like a massive awakening because it was like justice is my like strongest value. It's actually moved from fairness to justice over the last few years. I feel like justice is more like more like come on. And so when it was crossed, I was like, okay, this like I can't.
So what were the values? I'm curious. What were you left? You had some time to think and reflect. What were those values that were, so visceral but not clear that you now could like clearly see?
Yeah, for me, I think justice, authenticity, and vulnerability.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be able to go and stand and talk about really even the company's strategy if I don't buy into it. So that would just be inauthentic. And then you start looking around like at industry and what actually happens to people. And we all see it, people like not even get to the top. Actually, it's worse at kind of mid-manager, more junior levels, but they have less of a voice. So
True.
that for me was like, this is happening to so many people and I must have just been blind to it or, busy, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was a big lesson.
Yeah, because I guess when you're looking at your career, you wouldn't have maybe thought about the things that you actually are training and teaching now because you just probably went with it, and you figured it out and like it worked out, whatever system DNA, you kind of had. But you were obviously working in an industry that is, and at that level, I don't know, I want to pull up the statistics. So in the finance world here, for example, women, there's less than 9% of CEOs here in the UAE. And looking at globally, it's still only about 18% are like senior managers, right? So, and especially there's industries that, those numbers might differ, but in industries like tech, finance, they are traditionally very male dominated. How did you navigate your career to reach that level? Like you've gone through it. So what would you tell other people who want to share that same journey with you? What are the lessons that you learned from that? Yeah,
so just on the stats, I think it's something around 7% of CEOs in the UAE are female, but just there's no real differentiator. So in London, the FTSE 100, just 7% of CEOs on the FTSE 100 are female.
Wow.
So it's like, there's greater gender parity on other levels in like the UK and Europe than here, and that's just down to like maturity of the market. But actually at that top level, there's no real difference. So I navigated in the way that I think a lot of women do today, which is suffered chronically from imposter syndrome, like bent over backwards to be as accommodating as possible, took jobs without necessarily the corresponding pay rise, kept my mouth shut when perhaps I should have spoken up. I, experienced sexist remarks that I just learnt to ignore. But what I know now, and that kind of disappeared as I moved up, as the more confident you get, that changes.
The title is kind of like, no matter what you say, I'm here, so like, get out of here. Yeah, 100%.
And the practice of just speaking up and saying what's right. And for me, it became more about, when it became less about me and more about the team, I was able to speak up in a different way because it's you're representing the people, and as you get to those more senior positions, it's like, I'm the only woman and I'm going to do it for all of us, but it's tiring.
Yeah.
But on your point around what would I tell other people, I would say, the work we do, absolutely don't do that. Like, you're not alone. There's no need for you to feel like an imposter. We're here for you. And actually, it's about identifying who you are, like all this stuff that we talked about, and like bringing that authentically, and don't change, because respect is built in people you trust and people who are authentic, not the loudest voice. So I would do things differently, and I certainly did that as I moved up.
Sure.
But at the start, I mean, yeah, it's pretty painful.
On the imposter syndrome part, because this is from lots of conversations, like my wife and my female friends, that is a very common thing I hear. Imposter syndrome, and they all, mashallah, have like high titles and high positions, kind of like what you had. So I'm like, why even at this level do you still have imposter syndrome? Why do you feel like an imposter? That's what I never understood from my perspective.
I'd be interested afterwards. I'll ask you the same. Like, do men have it? Because I believe they do. I just believe
of course
they
we
don't
do.
talk about
Of course,
it.
guys, we do. Let's be honest here. All right. I'll speak on everyone's behalf. It's fine.
Yeah, because I also believe, because I like to be balanced with everything. So although my work is female focused, I believe in like equality and allyship massively. And I think men actually go to work and feel like they might need to have this more masculine persona, less empathetic than they might be necessarily at home. And so I think that is quite challenging as well.
Yeah.
But there's a majority of men, so there's a sense of comfort.
Sure.
Whereas for women, when you're surrounded by men in a meeting, naturally you feel like the odd one out, and your style might be very different. We are different.
Yeah, very true.
And sometimes you can bring a more masculine energy to something. Sometimes it might be a more feminine energy, and the same with men. So I think unless you have a critical mass of at least 3+ women in a room, then there's almost no point in having one, like in terms of to affect change.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Because we kind of shy away. It's exhausting to speak up. We're not backing each other.
You kind of like more people to hear the message that you're trying to say.
Exactly. So there is some stats around it, but it's at least 3 women, for example, in the boardroom to make a difference, to have a female influence. And that's not saying that one can't be an amazing, powerful voice, but it's that.
That's what the data says right now.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that imposter just comes from, we don't see many women in these positions. We're so used to seeing men there. And it is a bit crazy, really. It's 2026. And at this rate, we're really not going to reach gender parity in the next couple of 100 years. So it needs to accelerate. We need to do more.
Well, I'm sure with the work you're doing, hopefully we can, move that needle forward, a lot faster. But you mentioned masculine and feminine energy. Okay, this is going to be a big monologue. So I read a book about this. It was called The Way of the Superior Man. And it's not about being a superior man. What it talked about was the differences between masculine and feminine energy. How are they represented? How does the masculine grow? How does the feminine grow? For example, feminine grows through praise, masculine grows through challenge. Now, where I get frustrated is, for example, I hear women sometimes that are, in leading positions, whatever, and they're like, oh, I had to be so masculine today and whatever. And I'm like, why is that a bad thing? You get what I'm saying? I'm like, if I was a leader and I was being more, softer, empathetic, whatever, maybe I can just speak for myself. I'm not going to come home being like, I felt very feminine today. Do you get what I'm saying? So when you bring masculine and feminine, when you label it like that, I think you're adding fire to the problem. Because someone I spoke to once said, shouldn't those qualities, masculine and feminine, just be the qualities of any leader, any good person? Why does it have to be gendered? So that's my monologue. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think we're saying the same thing, and that's why I like to use masculine and feminine like energy rather than man or woman. Like, I felt like a man today. Like, that's not right, But for me, it's these energies, and the way that we lead should be up to us. And sometimes it's, sometimes people are like, oh, she leads like a man, or she does this, she's exactly like the men, like she's not a woman, all of this stuff.
True.
And that's kind of forced by probably what that person might have needed to emulate to be successful at the time. So there's so many factors to it. But for me, like, I'm probably generally more masculine energy when it comes to leadership. I'm probably more masculine energy anyway, but I use different styles depending on who I'm talking to and whether there's a trusted environment. So you could come out of a meeting and think, we need to deliver this strategy tomorrow, and this is how we're going to do it X, Y, Z. And there's no time for how does everybody feel about it, you know? But when you've built that trust, you can be like that and flex between them. I'd say also, just to challenge you, is a lot of men that aren't actually that empathetic in these leadership positions. So they don't come home and think, oh, was I too empathetic? Like, it's very rare that you get like that. Because of Imposter the other way, maybe, I don't know. But it's, it'd be nice to see men flexing a bit more that kind of empathetic muscle, which would then enable like everybody to flow between it a bit more. But I know what you're saying. Yeah, no,
I completely agree with you on that point. And that's kind of like what I'm saying. It seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me like I've heard my wife, you know, like say this, she's like, oh, man, I felt so masculine today. I'm like, okay, what's the problem with that? You know, this is what I don't understand. It's almost like because I use my masculine, I am now less feminine, but it's not true. So that challenge or that balance is something I don't maybe understand or have a perspective on.
Yeah, I think that is conditioning. You know, we're conditioned from a very young age to be polite and to be quiet and not to be seen, but to be effective and fix things in the background. And that's conditioning. And that's what we work towards in GAIA a lot, is sharing this stuff. So as a collective in a small group, just talking about it makes that voice disappear slowly. You know, so your wife would probably benefit. She's probably not surrounded by people that she can talk about this stuff with, because you don't do it with your friends. You know, it's a completely different context.
It is different context, that's true. Yeah. And to your point, like we were talking earlier, you mentioned gender parity, and, you know, people talk about the gender gap and people wanting more fairness. This is what I hear a lot. We want it to be more fair. Okay. Fairness, if that's the target, in my opinion, that is not a good target, because fairness is completely subjective. What's fair to you might not be fair to someone else, might not be fair to me. And just because it's fair to you doesn't mean I agree, like, oh, okay, I should get on that boat too. So if fairness isn't the place we should head to, you mentioned justice earlier. Is there a way to get to that, or what would be a healthier way to approach that challenge?
Yeah, so fairness for me isn't giving everyone the same, you know, because what you might need to get where you want to be is completely different from the next person. But it's about like equality and equal access in whatever that means to individuals. So as a leader, knowing exactly what each member of your team needs to be successful, and that can be a huge range, you know. Some people it's like one-on-one coaching support. Some people are like, actually, I'm ready, I'm confident, I'd like to be put on a different project for like this amount of time. And it's just different things for different people. But I don't think, oh, we just give everyone the same, because that's not fair.
There you go.
Different people need different stuff.
Exactly, thank you. Exactly, to your point, yeah. And so you know how they say they've had like now, there's like quotas, you have to have certain companies, certain countries, there's quotas, you have to have this many women in your company and whatever. The thing I think about is, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, because I understand why, you know, because it's putting more emphasis into ensuring that this does happen, so I get that part. But if me and you are applying for a job, same level, same quality, same experience, do you think would it be fair just because there's a quota to fill that the woman would get it? Do you understand? Or flip it vice versa? You know, I'll give it to the man because I don't want, you know, a woman, for example.
So, first of all, I think quotas are a great idea, because the dial's not moving without them. And it doesn't move without them. It's the force, right? Yeah. It's the force, it's the reality, you know? So I think not overly aggressive. So to say like we want 50% of C-suite execs next year to be female would be too much. You know, that's going to drive the wrong behavior. You're going to get inclusive hires, but it's not necessarily the right person getting the job. But to my point about me and you, I think you can always differentiate. No two candidates are ever the same.
Okay.
So I feel like if you're interviewing with a diverse panel, you're asking the right questions, and you have the right controls in place through that process, right from the way you write job profiles and all that, you know, like candidate search, then the interviews and how that process goes, then the right person gets the job. But like it could never be like Khaled and Marisa the same. Like they're equal, I can't define it. So that's just not right, you know. And if it is like that, then you've got the wrong people hiring.
I understand that, but don't you think in that example, having that quota at the back of my mind is gonna influence my decision whether to go with you or to go with me? Do you get what I'm saying? Like I don't know how, if it creates like a what's the word?
Bias
in that.
I think though, like you've also got to look at the team as a whole. So diversity broadly pays, you know, so commercially it pays for inclusivity, people being part of the culture, like it really drives innovation in teams and profitability. So more diverse teams are 25% more profitable than the lower quartile. It's like all facts.
Oh,
like
really?
By
okay.
McKinsey. There's loads of stuff on this.
Gotcha.
And ethnic diverse teams are 36% more profitable.
Really?
Tested over. So it's not just like me being like, oh, you know, it's nice, women should be there. I mean, they should, but like, and also all ethnicities as well to be representatives and different factors. You know, it's not, I focus on females almost because it's the low-hanging fruit.
It's the best place to start.
Yeah, it's kind of not that low-hanging because it hasn't shifted the dial. But I would be like, okay, so if I have a team of 10 women, and I have had this, I've had a team where 6 directors were women and then 3 men, and I'm interviewing 2 people and I'm like, there's a woman and a man. And I'm like, for the team, a man is probably better if I can't differentiate,
for that balance.
To balance it, you know. So I definitely wouldn't want a team with white Western women, like one, you know, we're all thinking the same. You want to bring in diverse perspectives from all angles.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's more, it's multifaceted. I think the trouble is like leaders who are hiring with big teams, they often don't have the tools, the knowledge, that, you know, and we're naturally attracted to people that look like us. You know, we like people that look like us and behave in the same way.
Well, who doesn't? Of
They're
course.
going to understand my instructions.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
But it doesn't breed like imagination or innovation. So it's
that helps us double down on the thing we both think about, right? Yeah. So you've worked. I know you worked. You said in Brazil and like South America. You've been like around the world, and you said that one of your strengths is that you can balance between different cultures because you've had that experience. Now, culture is a big part of this, not just culture of women in the workplace, because that's like one segment. There's also culture of just women in society, you know, and different cultures in the world are very different in how women are viewed, the opportunities and so on. So when it comes to like women and leadership, where does the cultural aspect come in? And maybe you could share some differences you've seen in your experience working maybe in different markets or with different people who come from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? Particularly in the UAE, which is where it's most extreme because it's 90% expat and, of course, people from all over the world. And you can't take for granted anyone's background or assume that you know anything about anyone because it's all so different, you know? Even if you think of British people, there's pretty much, we're brought up, tends to be like, you go get them, you know? Like, it's not this stay at home and look after the family type vibe. But then say from a British Indian perspective, that could be very different depending on how traditional the
even
family
within the
is.
same like culture in a way, right?
Exactly, they're British as well, but you don't know how traditional families are, and there's all sorts of these, you know, heavy expectations that travel through cultures. And I would say here there's definitely a pressure still on the homemaker side. So even if you perhaps go and you have an amazing job, maybe the expectation is that you step out of that. And it's not for me to say whether that's right or wrong, but it is to challenge and support that and anybody's journey, because ultimately there can be big generational shifts as well. And there's a lot of people here are part of that change now, but it's so important. And I have to remind myself every day, you know, to respect that cultural difference and not think like, oh, that's so wrong, or because it's not, you know, it's years worth of tradition. And British people, we don't respect family in the same way that they do in other parts of the world, which I don't think is a good thing. You know, being here, you can see how like warm and lovely that is, and how everybody takes care of their parents and stuff. Whereas we just go to university and then that's it. See ya. So it's complicated. I would say places, you know, for example, India and China, massive push for women in leadership. It's not less of this kind of stay-at-home culture, which was unexpected for me. So that was a learning. And lots of women in tech, you know, lots of women actually here in STEM roles and coming out, you know it from here, but coming out of university with those qualifications, much higher than men. So always being challenged.
Yeah, true. Very true. And I feel like you, with the coming on to like GAIA and the work you do, I think you really need to take that into account. You know, like even when you're giving, I know you've probably come up with, as we all do, frameworks and systems that have worked perfectly for you and will help most people, but then you have to add that nuance of understanding, okay, she's from this place, this is how they think, that's how they think, okay, and then we have to bring that in. So is the house, I feel you have to do a lot of work understanding the person's background to give them the best result doing the work that you do together.
Yeah, definitely. And my response to that and how we deal with that is always just to be curious, you know, to ask questions and to learn, because it's so different depending on where you're from, but also just your family tradition and background. You can never make assumptions based on where someone's from. You know, they're so multifaceted, and everything that we do is really focused on who you are as a person and how do we maximize that and make the most for you. Yeah. Whatever that is.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny that you said this started as just like a community networking thing, you know, meet some women, you know, get together, have like these conversations. And I know now the community's grown and you guys are launching an app and you do one-on-one coaching and all that stuff. So let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
Now there are lots of platforms like this, you know, out there. So my question to, you know, everyone that is in a space like that is, what is different about GAIA? What do you bring in from your experience, you know, because you've been at the place that a lot of women in careers aspire to want to go to. So I think that comes with a lot of insight, you know, and value. So I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest differentiator for GAIA versus other networks is that we're a community, not a network. So there's nothing surface level about it. I used to go to networking events and kind of wait for the buffet to open, you know.
Can relate to that.
Like awkward. Exchange some business cards and then nothing ever comes from that. Whereas GAIA is, even though the community's growing, at the core, we meet in small groups per month. So every month is 3 hours of groups of 10. We have all sorts of different events on top of that and stuff where you get to do that networking and broader piece. But it's deep. You know, within that, like small groups, we really talk through issues, opportunities and challenges and support. So you leave knowing that you've got this group of women who are going to hold you to account, challenge you, but also support you. So that's really different. It's not surface level. It's scarily deep, actually, very quickly. Yeah,
it is. And I resonate with that a lot now. I've noticed lots of communities have been popping up here. So I'm an ambassador for a community called Founder Connects, and it's a community of over 300 tech startups and founders. And like, to your point, it's not a network. It really is a community. Every month we have what we call these squad calls. So like you guys, we get 5 founders where all of us, we sit in a call of an hour and everyone just, hey man, let it out. What are you feeling? Oh, my wife, this business, this client. Everyone will like share and try to help. And what I've noticed is there is a growing demand for these type of things. These big networks or communities that you can work with in a small way. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because even when I go to a big networking event, I'm like, okay, hi, whatever. But when I go to like my community events, you know everyone, you know, you meet new people that join all the time. It's just a different energy when you build that familiarity with people. And I think that's something that you're really trying to like push, it sounds like, with what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as, you know, the world of AI and tech and everything grows and we become, I guess, even more separated and more isolated, because you don't need to talk to as many people because you got like 50 SMEs in your back pocket in your phone, you know. So,
True.
And so I really think people actually long for community, and particularly here as well, because it can be quite lonely for people and in big leadership positions, but also if you're like new to the market, still a bit transient, people are really looking for those deep relationships, and it can't be underestimated, you know, those conversations, because you just don't have them with your friends.
There you go. Yeah, 100%. When the context is already set, you can, and you want to have a specific type of conversation, it comes out very different than it's just me and you chatting, you know, having a coffee, 100%. So you work with women on helping them, you know, develop, finding their voice and being authentic and not only get to the leadership positions, but stay there. So the staying there is an interesting part for me because, and you touched on this, how like companies nowadays, you know, a one-day workshop, sorry, it's not gonna do anything, you know, like an awareness day, it's not gonna, you know, whatever. Okay, these are little things, but you need something sustainable and a system that can continuously like have that like escalator of like women going up, going up, right? That's the key. But then, is it, from your experience, yes, actually interesting, is it harder to get there or stay there? Do you get what I'm saying? Because you have to move a certain way to get there. And then if I want to stay, how do I just do what I've always done, or do I have to act differently now? Because I think that's really an interesting difference.
I think both. I think it's incredibly hard to get there, but with systems like GAIA, it helps, because that is about the self-regulation, the self-awareness. How do you just let it go at the end of the day? You know, how can you be stressed about something in the office and then when you leave it's done? You know, and how do you not internalize that stuff? Which, you know, I know a lot of women would lie in bed and think about one comment they made in a meeting that's totally irrelevant to
100%.
you know, I do as well still sometimes. My husband's like, go to sleep. Could hear me like moving around. And you know, it's like, why is that playing on your mind?
Yeah.
I think the challenge is with staying there, sometimes there's a maternity sort of a hidden tax. It's difficult for women to come back, and workplaces aren't flexible enough. But I also think women hit a certain age in their life, kind of 40 to 45. My therapist actually said this to me. She was like, if you don't do it now, you're not going to go, because this like 38 to 42 period is quite crucial. And I think a lot of women just come into their own and come into their power then. They're like, you know what? I don't need this.
Yeah, that's it. You know, you're just setting yourself, right?
Yeah. I'm done. And I have the experience now to go and do something else. It's still very challenging to walk away, but I think that's the challenge. So it's about organisation shifting as well to accommodate that. And if there were more women, it would just be a completely different environment. And I believe, I used to not do anything unless I felt like I was changing the world in one hit.
Okay.
You know, now, and that's why it's kind of like paralysis a little bit. But now with GAIA, I feel like with one woman, the ripple effect for like, you know, everybody that she leads, all her friends and everything, it's like hundreds of people per woman. And that's what we see is, you know, the shifts and the changes, just like so transformational that you shouldn't underestimate that. So I believe we just keep edging. We also work inside corporates running in-house female leadership accelerator programs.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well.
Okay, that's awesome.
That,
okay,
like ecosystem. So the more companies that invest in stuff like that, the better. We also run mixed groups with men and women, which works amazing because it just opens up that space for honest conversation, which you need to have facilitated because you're not going to do it without
no,
external.
you got to have someone to, like, you know, poke you, you know, prime you with the questions and so on. On the organization part, I know you talked about how organizations need to adapt, you know, give women more, you know, opportunities. I think here I heard yesterday or something, they just increased the maternity leave even more. I can't remember it's what number, so I don't want to misquote it. But you said one of the key issues is the missing piece is education. The question I think about, because I agree with you, but then my next question is, I'm like, okay, but what do I need to learn?
I think there's two things. So maternity leave is one thing, which is great, but paternity leave is that's the one that's going to move the dial, you know, because parenting just needs to be more balanced. If we're going to have gender equality in corporates, then it starts at home. You know, it starts by sharing those responsibilities, because it's not possible to work 12 hours a day, go home, sort the kids out, sort the shopping out, you know, think about like everybody else's life when you're like up here at work. You just burn out. So I think the education, you know, when people say, oh, you're a working mum, it's like, well, you're a working dad.
Yeah,
you know, like,
yeah.
Me and my husband are 50-50 at home, and it comes naturally, and he's very like that anyway. But if we weren't, I'd be like...
yeah. But your day today. Yeah.
But again, talking about cultures, that is
massive.
Big. That's massive. But it's normalising things, you know. So don't miss your kids' sports day if you're a man or a woman. Tell people that you're going.
Yeah.
And make these conversations normal. And if you are a man in a position of authority, that allyship is huge in you do the same. Don't just talk about it and say, oh, she's gone because she's got her kid's sports day. Like, you go as well. And I think that's it. I think it's just so much is shouldered on the woman, and it really shouldn't. And to shift that is, we need allies and we need men. And there's so many men that would love to be more outspoken about this stuff as well. And, you know, you have experiences with your wife and you don't want her to feel like that and feel like an imposter. And so it's really just broadening the conversation to men and women.
Yeah, and I think that is the last point you said is, I think there's a lot of work happening on the women's side, but I think more work needs to happen on our side to just, I think, be more aware of what's going on. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine not long ago, and because I've heard of, you know, I think when people sometimes try to do the right thing, it just gets pushed to a level that it's not supposed to, like with feminism and like the woke stuff and whatever. Like the essence of it, cool, you know, whatever. But what it became is like, that's not what, you know, it pushed me away, even personally. So sometimes I'm like, it makes me cynical because I'm like, did you have this experience? Did this really happen just because you're a woman, or are you taking accountability, or you're not taking accountability and using that as an excuse? So there's always that balance that goes on in my head. So we're having a conversation and she was telling me a story and I'm like, I can't remember the context specifically, but I left that story being like, oh, I didn't know. You know, I didn't understand or appreciate how often this happens, the degree to which it happens, and, you know, to put your hands up and be like, oh, this is like it was the first time I'm like, oh, this is like a thing. So how do you manage like that?
I think it's important not to internalize too much. So I think if you start telling yourself, this happens because I'm a woman, this happens because I'm a woman, or this happens because, like, you know, whatever factor it is, I think it gets worse. And then I think you feel sorry for yourself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling any of that. The system is full of gender bias. We're like set up to not be as successful as men. You know, the structures that we have, the patriarchy and everything that exists today benefits men. But I think that 80% of how we resolve this is within self. So we lobby from, like, you know, that we try and push and make changes. And as GAIA grows, we'll be more and more active in that space with various campaigns and stuff. But really, it's about how you show up and how comfortable you are. And if someone has made you feel like that, and you think it's because you're a woman, pull them aside and say, you know, I'm curious as to why you mentioned that. Was it something about my behavior? Or, you know, let them answer, but be curious and start to challenge, which I know is very difficult.
That is hard.
But if you don't do it, other people won't do it for you. So we need to create that and normalize that. And that's what we get through GAIA's members just feeling more confident and not seeing all this as conflict. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, and someone might not know. Like, everybody makes mistakes as well. And, you know, to the cultural thing, how do you undo hundreds of years where women have only worked in the house for their ever existence in, you know, for example, maybe in Pakistan it's more like that than other places. I don't know, but from my experience talking to Pakistani members here is that it's more likely to be that in culture in their home country.
Yeah.
So how do you undo that when you're sat next to it? You know, so I would challenge that and have those conversations and normalize it, and that's where you'll see the change.
I appreciate the challenge part, you know, because I think a lot of people would typically not, even myself, if someone said something, unless it's really like thing, I probably wouldn't challenge it, but like, whatever, okay, you know, life goes on. But to your point, you have to control, what I've learned this past especially year is you have to control your narrative. It's up to you to make people decide, see you the way you want them to see you, man or woman. This applies to both sides. But now if we come on to like the leadership aspect between like men and women, I know there's many, you know, big things I hear like, oh, a common one I've always heard of, like, oh, you're too energetic, you're too happy, you're too emotional, you're always too something. And I'm just like, I don't know why that is seen in, you know, that way. And women feel that like, oh, that's not a good thing. This will not help me get to where I want to, you know, get to where I want to go. So how do you come authentically? I'm trying to be authentic and act in my way into a system that is built already, to your point, not for that. So how do we address that part and the misconceptions between men and women in leadership?
Yeah, so I call this the likability tax, and it's definitely true. So you can say something and you're seen as confident and assertive. I can say the same thing and I can be called aggressive or emotional. And I have actually been called emotional before on a stage when I was doing a diversity presentation, and somebody like mentioned something that I disagreed with, and he really raised his voice, and I mirrored the raise in voice, and he was like, oh, you're so emotional, and you know, and I've suddenly felt about 8 years old again, and I thought, there is no way if I was a man stood here, you would have said I'm emotional. Absolutely no way.
You're 100% right on that.
And that's what I responded with, and I said, and I am emotional because I really care about this stuff. That's why I'm here. You know, this is my life. But other people aren't able to say that or feel that they can't say those things. So we bend to fit into structures that don't necessarily support us. But again, I think is to call it out. You know, so I'm curious as to why you think I'm emotional. Just say it straight away is so much more powerful than to sit on it and go home and think about it.
And like ruminate about it and stuff and whatever,
But also to share it and share it with men, mentors, and ask people to speak up for you as well. So, you know, have those conversations on your behalf as well to say, you know, I actually didn't think emotional was a good word to use there. In the same way that I would do it if anyone, like, you know, when people have spoken inappropriately in meetings, I might not call it out straight away because I don't want to be seen to, you know, hijack the meeting and disrupt or bully someone. But separately, I would say, look, you said this and it's not appropriate, actually. It didn't. I know you didn't mean it, but next time, can you change the language? And so it's not just about the person, it's about other people being allies. And I'm the same, right? So sometimes I can even be at a party, I can hear someone saying something inappropriate, and I think, your top value is justice. Like, it's like, like, you know, like I can really feel it, like viscerally, like, am I going to let this go, or am I going to go and say something? But like for me, doing this work, I always speak up. So I just try and do it like immediately and rip the plaster off and just say it. And I also disassociate myself from people where we're just totally misaligned.
Yeah, fair.
Which is to preserve my own energy.
But on it seems that the likability tax it seems that it's only women that think about it. I don't understand. What's curious to me is, why do women care more about, you know, that aspect of being, you know, liked and whatever than, you know, a man would? I don't really understand that.
I think it's because it's commented on a lot more.
Commented on?
Commented on. So I don't think men really say, like, have things like, oh, you're emotional, or that came across as aggressive, or get taken to one side in their performance views and be like, oh, you know, just watch your tone a little bit, or so-and-so. Like, I've had in performance reviews, oh, so-and-so thinks you're young for this role, so, you know, just make sure that you're, like, going in with executive presence. Like, that's BS, you know, like, so they think that I'm young for this role because they're 20 years older and I'm more senior, probably. But, like, you have to have confidence to really think like that. Otherwise, it's just chipping away at the confidence that you do have. And it comes from this conditioning as well. Women are told to be good girls. You know, I catch myself saying it to my daughter sometimes. I'm like, good girl. I'm like, no, don't say that. Like, go, be wild, do what you want. You know, you got it. Like, stop doing ballet, go boxing.
Yeah.
You know, it's because there's already conditioning happening, and I'm super aware of it as well. So it's just ingrained in us. And women, you know, there's various personality tests you can do. One of them is this free saboteurs positive intelligence test on the internet. Was great. Women are way higher on their people pleaser saboteurs than men, you know, that is so difficult to break away from. So it's actually cognitively in us. Yeah,
the people, that's a very, very good point. The people, you're right, it is the people pleasing aspect, because I see it, you know, and I'm, you know, sometimes my friends will say something and like, but I said this in the meeting, what if this happens? I'm like, why do you even care? You know, like, it's done. Not only is it done, but bleep him, you know, to get out of here. So, like, just move on with it. So I wanted to come to this point when it comes to, you know, the leadership aspect. Now you work with a lot of different women and so on. To round off our conversation today, I'd love to hear from your experience. What are the biggest, I guess, roadblocks that you've noticed that they have? and what has been what is the shift they made that changed, everything, even, for yourself included, because you've gone through the process yourself.
So the biggest shift is definitely imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't belong. And that's because there's not enough of us. It's not normal to see like 50-50 of women at different positions. So it's hard to feel like you belong, particularly in some industries are heavily dominated by men, which you already spoke about. And we've seen huge shifts in overcoming that. And that is really just understanding who you are and showing people who you are. So actually turning up authentically and saying the thing that you want to say, not being quiet. A lot of women will sit there and the ideas are going around the table and think, oh, I wish I said that. Like, I thought about that 10 minutes ago, and that's where we see the shift. But that starts with a fundamental understanding of who you are and what your blockers are. So, there's personality profiling, but looking at your values and all those kind of things. And then taking control of those saboteur voices like people-pleasing, like hypervigilant, like avoider, like hyperachiever. Knowing what those are and getting those under control, huge shifts.
So it's the understanding first, and then once you understand, show up authentically, build up that confidence, and then speak up.
Yes, please. Because if we don't do it, then
no one's going to do it.
No one's going to do it,
You're 100%
so we've got to
right.
Own it.
Yeah. To round off our conversation for today, Marisa, I just have, this is a question we ask all our guests. So the message with this podcast is to showcase that success comes in many forms and that learning never stops. And throughout your career, I'm sure you've learned 10 million things, personally, professionally. But I always believe someone learned something along their journey that breaks that ceiling and changed everything. So, and I like to call it a game changer learning. So if I asked you what that was for you, what would you say?
Mine would be alignment. Yeah, and I feel like if you're pushing something hard and you're not getting to where you need to be, you need to look around and think, is it the direction that you should be pushing in? I think if something feels too hard, it's probably the universe telling you, go the other way.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
You think so?
I think
Isn't that just... Well, I'm not saying this is wrong, but I could also argue that, maybe this is... Because you can look at that as this wall is not the right wall for me, or this is the wall that I have to get through, to get there.
I think, though, that you should be seeing snippets of progress.
Proof, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Don't just continue with the same thing. So for me, with GAIA, I could see, it's difficult. It's really difficult to create this kind of community. And member by member, it started to feel like it was slow to begin with. And I was like, okay, but people are joining and they are getting so much out of this. So keep going. But if I think about my corporate experience, there were so many times before the triple where I should have walked away or should have thought, actually, this is not for me. And that started from when I was 22, and I'm 40 now. So I didn't listen to the signs and I followed almost what other people wanted me to do. But I really feel like if you're pushing and you're not seeing glimmers of light, then stop. So I look for alignment, mind, body, soul, purpose. Yeah, and run with it.
And run with it. I think that's a really great message, not only to women, but I think this applies to everyone. And to your point, I think if you... The reason when you said the wall, what came in my mind is I don't want people to just give up.
No, don't do that. No.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So but you do at the same time, and whatever you're doing, you need some glimmer, silver lining to be this looks like it's the right direction. I'm not sure yet, but I can take that next step, right?
Yeah, and grit and resilience is something that you should work on and dig in. Yeah, absolutely, but not so focused that you can't see feedback and change, and we talk about this quite a lot, but you need to follow alignment, and if something's not right for you. And we just keep on going and going. And a lot of the time it's money or it's title. But do you really want to do it? What is the driving purpose? Yeah. But don't give up. Work is hard. If you want to be successful, it's hard.
No, I think, rounding it off with, the grit and resilience aspect is so important. And to your point, it's focused with flexibility. I see where I want, but let me keep my mind open to see what are the other ways, you know, that we could get there. Marisa, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show today. This has been such a fun conversation, a topic I love to talk about, debate, and you've definitely given me more context and a different perspective on things that maybe I wasn't aware of, I didn't realize. I think for anyone listening to the conversation, man, woman, whatever, you want to be a leader, you want to have a good life, whatever you want, I think there's so much they could take from this episode. So I want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Khaled. It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Thank you so much. Guys, everyone listening, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care.